Broadcasting live to the world. Now, it's Sheila Zielinski.
This is a very sinister Luciferian eugenics plan.
Sheila Zielinski.
These spineless weasels preach what people want to hear. They replace repentance with dreams of the good life. Mindless minions. Dying daily, taking up your cross, suffering and sacrificing have been superseded with name it and claim it. And as dark as I know it looks out there, the good news is that God is advancing his kingdom. And it's very exciting to be a part of his great commission.
It's Sheila Zielinski. The Sheila Zielinski Show, the only show to give you the truth behind the headlines, prophecy, and the deeper things of God. Now, here is your host, end-time watchwoman, Sheila Zielinski.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sheila Zielinski Show for this January 29th. We have an amazing lineup of guests today, folks. And guess what? I want to hear from you, the listener, today. It's going to be a very exciting program. And why is that? Because I have literally the John Wayne and Chuck Norris of economics and finance paired together. What a dynamic duo coming together to answer what I like to call this show, everything you ever wanted to know about money, but were afraid to ask. There's a handle, isn't it? Welcome to the program, Joseph Meyer, and of course, the renowned Ross Powell. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Good evening, Sheila. Thank you for having me as a guest this evening. It's a pleasure to visit with you and your listening audience. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you, Sheila, for having me on. I appreciate that.
So where I want to start, gentlemen, is, Ross, first of all, start with telling the listeners, for those who are new listeners, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, and again, thank you for having me on your show, and it's great to be with Joseph as well. My background is in banking and in insurance, 30 years in banking and insurance with large banks on the inside with some of the major banks, Tier 1 banks, Fed seats and things of that nature. I have a Six Sigma black belt background from statistics and process engineering. I have been a naval officer with special weapons and intel, which I use some of those skills along with financial background to weave a tapestry of thought and build a word picture for folks to understand better the financial goings on of this country. So it's been a fun ride so far.
I've been a Wall Street professional since 1972. I began investing in 1966. I've been an arbitrator mediator with the NASD, the NYSE, and FINRA for 20 years. I'm the author and editor of the Financial Macro Investment Newsletter, Straight Money Analysis, and we've been writing it since September of 2009.
I want to start out with the Baltic Dry Index. What is your take on what's going on with that? Joseph, then Ross, you weigh in.
Well, the Baltic Dry Index, as you know, it measures the cost of shipping raw materials such as coal, iron ore, and grain all over the world. And the Baltic Dry Index has fallen about 20% so far in 2016 to around the 380 level, the first time it's ever fallen below the 400 level, and I think it's speaking volumes as to what's going on globally in all the economies. I think the global economies of the world are now in deep economic downturns. I think the major exporting countries, China, South Korea, are now feeling the pain of the economic slowdown. Quite frankly, I think the global economy is re-entering recession very rapidly, Sheila. That's what I think is happening.
Sure, I would agree with Joseph, and I just checked today. The Baltic Dry Index is down to 325 as of today, so that's down from 1222. I mean, it's down year to date 32%, and within the same year 46%. So it's just dropping like a rock. And some of my sources in the truck business and in the railroad business and things of that nature are saying their loads, which are not obviously are not part of the Baltic Dry Index, but the transportations index, even on the stock exchange, is down 25% year over year, and it made a jump to big time today with the market rally on the Bank of Japan's negative interest rates. But the Baltic Dry Index is just showing that shipping and exports and trade is coming to a standstill.
And so essentially, and I want you to weigh in on this too, Joseph, I'll start with you. How does that play out with Joe Lunchbox Carrier on the street?
Well, I think there's no question the U.S. economy is re-entering recession. All the global economies of the world are now, I think, looking for additional stimulus from the central banks of the world. We have very pronounced problems through Southeast Asia. We've got problems now in the European Union. Japan is now questionable as to what they're going to be doing next to certainly revitalize their economy. And as you know, we've seen interest rates, certainly as we talk to the yuan in China, be affected, and we've seen a very severe decline in the Shanghai market as well. So I think at some point we're going to see a QE4, we're going to see additional stimulus. I think it'll be well coordinated by the central banks of the world. Quite frankly, Sheila, I don't think they have any choice at this point.
I mean, we see digital currency, money disappearing, retail's finished. Look at Walmart, McDonald's, you got Gap closing stores. We're seeing the sort of Illuminati signature global upheaval here. It's this globular cluster, I call it the New World Order. I think David Spangler says it's, your initiation ceremony. I mean, it's crippling the people. It's shutting down everything. We've got numerous countries, slowdowns in Russia, Germany, China, severe problems in Europe. You talked about the Baltic Index here. I mean, when you have the shifting of raw materials, iron ore, coal, grain, pick your commodity, and you have this kind of drop, 70 to 80% from the August level, what does that signify, Joseph?
I think it signifies that the structural underpinnings of the global economy are now crumbling, and I think we've had a tremendous buildup of debt over the last decade. And I believe we're going to see slowly an unwinding of that debt, and quite frankly, I don't think it'll be very pleasant.
Comments, Ross?
I would concur with Joseph. You mentioned Joe Lunchbox or Joe Sixpack. I think they're going to find that their jobs are at risk, and the largest growing job market in the United States is service, and they're low-paying jobs. You're going to find the high-paying jobs in industry and manufacturing have pretty much disappeared, and they're going to get even more rare. So you're going to find the average standard of living for Americans are going to go down, and the recession is going to kick in, and you'll see returns on their retirement funds going away. Just their buying power is going to go away, and if the Fed implements negative interest rates, it's going to try to punish savers. So at the end of the day, the individual or lifestyles in America are going to change significantly, and not to the better. And I think that's dovetails with what Joseph is saying.
Well, listen, I just want to throw this out here. The guest call-in number, I want to hear from you folks. We have two, I call them the Chuck Norrises of trends forecasting, economic gurus, financial wizardry. I hate to use those terms, boys, but answering all your questions, everything you ever wanted to know about money, but we're afraid to ask. So the number is 646-668-8039. Press 1 if you want to get into the queue and ask a question. I see there are some people in the queue. Press 1, though, guys, if you want to ask either Ross Powell or Joseph Meyer a question, or if you want to just even comment on anything. Before I go to the phone lines here, we really see this low, sort of slow grinding halt. Everything is in. When does this thing go completely off the rails, though, Joseph? That's my question to you, sir.
Well, I think we're probably in a generational bear market if we haven't already started one, and I think we're going to see a very sharp fall in all asset classes as we move forward in 2016 and 2017. You have to put in perspective, we've had an extraordinary bull cycle. The average bull market, as I'm sure you know, from 1942 to 2007 lasted on balance about 56 months. This bull market at its peak lasted about 78 months, or about 45% longer. So I believe the correction is going to be very deep. It's going to be very painful. It's going to be very sharp. And I think for the average investor, we have to look at preservation of capital as being the utmost investment concern at this time as to what I see ahead in these markets.
Well, I think the frightening thing is, of course, in December they raised interest rates. You know, we're already feeling the pain of these raised interest rates. That reminds me of 1937. Weigh in on that, Joseph, and then Ross, to you. Then we'll go to the phone line.
Well,
Sure.
I think it's interesting to note that the last time the Federal Reserve raised interest rates in the month of December, they raised them in the year of 1937. It brought upon us a very severe economic downturn as we were starting to come out of the Depression of the 30s. And the markets really didn't start to recover along with the economy till the start of World War II in 1941, Sheila.
Go ahead, sir, Ross.
Sure. I personally think, and I talked about this on another radio show back in December, actually in October, forecasting that they would do it, primarily because of the yuan's inclusion of the SDR. The capital flight would be going to the yuan, and there's a lot of things working against the petrodollar. And I think they did it to draw money into the United States to capital inflow. And so by doing that, they were trying to hedge against money going out to try to bring it in. And interesting enough, cash is king, and I think wealth preservation, as what Joseph was saying, is key. And here's some interesting statistics. In the last, few months, $208 billion has moved into money market accounts. Only $7 billion has moved into equities, and $46 billion has left fixed income like bonds and treasuries and things. So people are going into a cash position, and that includes every socioeconomic strata. So everybody, cash is king, and they're moving their money out of the markets and out of the risk, and they want to make sure that, as Joseph mentioned, wealth preservation. They want to keep what they have, and so return of investment is way more important than return on investment. So I think most Americans feel it, and if you do analysis of countries that have done negative interest rates, like Japan just announced, which bounced our market 400 points, which ended the month much better than they would have been in one of the worst months ever, but they actually brought it back, and it was only the second or third worst January ever. But people are feeling that something's not right. But when you go to negative interest rates, people start saving their money, and it's supposed to make them spend it. But Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, all these others that have negative interest rates, they're finding that their savings rate goes up instead of going down. So people want to preserve cash because they think everything is unstable and they can't depend on it to live on when they're older. So I think it has the opposite effect. But cash is king. Just listeners need to know cash is king.
Well, are we looking, Joseph, at a stimulus? Is that the only option here? Because, of course, look at this incredible QE. You mentioned QE4. You mentioned good old Bernanke 2.0 in a skirt, Janet Yellen with Keynesianism. I mean, if that isn't frightening what these people are doing when it comes to just churning out the quantitative easing. Who said that America lives off their printing press? I mean, it's getting frightening. What do you think is going to happen here? What are we looking at when this thing just completely implodes, Joseph?
Well, I don't think we're looking at a liquidity crisis very similarly to what we had in the 2000-2008 period. But I do believe we're looking at a pronounced economic slowdown. We have massive debt service by the individual sectors of government, corporations, and individuals. And we have unsustainable massive bubbles in common stocks, bonds, real estate, both commercial and residential. But we've got an economy now that is throwing off signs of weakness. I think the retailers through the holiday season probably had one of the worst Christmas holiday seasons ever. I agree the jobs being created are extremely poor. They're minimum wage, low benefit jobs. No way you can support a family or certainly start to save for retirement on these wages. And we're seeing now a transition in the global economy. We keep losing the manufacturing jobs that we have left, creating these service jobs, which just at the end of the day aren't going to allow this economy to recover and bring any kind of sustainable growth to the table. That's the way I see it.
Ross, weigh in on that.
I would concur completely. I think with the way the jobs are working and people's lifestyles and standard of living are going to go down, not just in the United States, but around the world. And you're seeing huge capital flight out of China and buying all kinds of land in the United States. They're trying to get hard assets for their money. So people's belief system in fiat currencies and things of that nature are finding that they want to have something that they can put their hands on.
But what's amazing to me, it's kind of like crouching tiger, hidden dragon. You see, China's been in stockpile mode for years, back to truck up with both hands and go. I mean, they kind of are, slowly, silently taking over everything. They own 90% of Manhattan. They own the Federal Reserve. When are people going to wake up here, though, Ross? And then we're going to take a call because we do have a load of calls in there. But when are people going to snap out of their dystopic trance while they're watching their football game and actually pay attention to what's happening here? What is it going to take here?
Well, I think you're already seeing it with, if you look at the political environment for the 2016 election, you're finding that folks are already waking up. You have progressive, you have people like Bernie Sanders, and you have Donald Trump. These guys are outside of the mainstream. People flocking to them. So there's an underpinning of people just don't feel right about where the country is going and just the way things are working. So they're waking up and they're saying, I don't like the political status quo. And so they're flocking to these people that, regardless of whether you believe in what they're saying, a lot of them are blowhards and it's just demagoguery. But at the end of the day, it's selling. So you're seeing people waking up and they don't know what they're feeling. They don't know but they just don't like what's happening. So they're finally waking up to say, look, whatever's going on, I'm getting left out. So all of this money that was awash from 2008 to now, and all of this great Wall Street gain, average Joe on the street didn't really gain much. So the wealth distribution has widened greater than it ever has. And so, in a statistic I used previously on another show, was it in 2010 it took it's like 600 billionaires to equate to 3.5 billion people's wealth. As of this year, it only takes 62 people's wealth to equal 3.5 billion people's wealth. So that spread is making people really upset because they're seeing that the wealth distribution has not been fair. So the globalization of the economy has hurt a large swath of people, not just in the United States, but around the world. And they're all saying, hey, this is not right. And you're seeing it in the political sphere. And just one thing that's going to make it even more crazy is if all of this talk of the email scandal for Hillary Clinton, if it comes to fruition where they're saying that she may get indicted, that's going to affect the markets and it's going to affect our entire political system because you're going to have to find somebody to take her place, and the mainstream party doesn't want Bernie in it. So that's not going to affect just the political realm of our country, but it'll affect the economy. It'll affect the markets, and I'd love to have Joseph talk about that. What the politics do to the markets, because he's much more experienced on that. But I would just love to hear what he had to say about that.
Well, I believe we're in extraordinary times, and I couldn't agree with you more. We're seeing wealth concentrated in fewer hands. I think people lose sight of the fact that at the height of the Depression in 1932, 1% of the population controlled 59% of the wealth of America. I think as to where we are in this current economic cycle, we've exceeded those levels. I think people lose sight of the fact, Ross, how much money's actually been pumped into this failed economy. The Fed balance sheet prior to 2007 was about $800 billion. As you know, we had TARP, which was around $800 billion bailout of Wall Street and the banks. But more interestingly, since then, the Fed's balance sheet has grown in excess of $4.5 trillion. Two questions I think people have to ask themselves: who is holding our debt, which is China, and who possibly at this point has gold reserves exceeding the U.S.? The answer is China. Those two questions should speak volumes as to what's going on and what possibly lies ahead.
Just let me throw this in here, Ross and Joseph. We have a bunch of callers. I want to make sure people know. Press 1 to get in the queue to ask the gentleman question. I'm going to go to the phone lines right now. Ending in 1533, you're live on the air. What is your question for the gentleman?
Hi there. I've been working in the oil and gas industry in Alberta, Canada for the last almost 15 years now, and I've never seen it this bad with the oil prices this low, probably since 2003. Do you think with the recent lifting of the economic sanctions in Iran is going to drive it even further down? And can you also speak on more mitigating factors that affect the oil prices today?
Great question, caller. Thank you. I'm going to put you back on hold. Go ahead. I'll start with you, Joseph.
I think we might have seen a temporary bottom in energy prices, and I think we got a counter trend rally now, which is going to try to take them back to the upside. But I think when we look at the percentage of decline that we've had, you go back and you look at the previous three major lows that we've had in oil. 1983 to 1986, prices fell 69% from the top to the bottom. 1996, 1980, 1998, 62% from the top to the bottom. 2008 to 2009, approximately 78% from the top to the bottom. And interestingly, the decline that we've had underway recently in the markets has taken us down to 77% from the top to the bottom. So I think we've got historical evidence here over a period of many years, which is indicating that the percentage fall we've had in energy prices could be signaling a bottom. I think to confirm that we've seen the lows in oil, I'd like to see a weekly close over 32.40. If we can stay above that, I think we have the possibility to rally in the short term, maybe 39 to 40.
Wow, great. Okay, I want you to weigh in on that, Ross.
Sure. There's a lot of talk that are going to 20 now. There's this bump that Joseph mentioned going up over 33 over the last couple of days is all based on rumor and supposition that the oil producing countries are going to create an agreement to cut back. And now the Iranians just made a note that they're going to start pumping like the devil. And so that whole idea that they're going to create this artificial constraint may go up in smoke, and we may find that it goes to 32 and then 30, then back down to 28 to 20. So Deutsche Bank saying it could go all the way down below 20. So it's you just don't know who to believe. But the thing that's interesting and you bring it back around to Joe Lunchbox is that gas is down to $1.59 here in Texas, but based on historical trends, you would think it would be down below $1. So at the end of the day, we're not seeing it at the pump as much as you are at the barrel price. So I think a lot of the lift is all supposition and thinking that they'll all get together and pull their heads out and they'll agree to cut their production. But greed is out there. They want to get as much money as they can while they can because their economies are suffering. So I would agree if we go, as Joseph was saying, up over $30 or better for the next week or two, I would say that we may have reached a bottom. But if some of this news that saying that the Russians and the Saudis and the Iranians and all the other people in the Gulf Crescent are going to say that, oh yeah, we're going to agree, we're going to cut production. If that doesn't happen, I think you can see a quick downside rapidly. One last thing to the gentleman's question was, what do you think from there? And so in Alberta, I know they're suffering in North Dakota and Texas. It's not just the price of the oil and the rigs, but it's all the peripheral people that are part of that, the pipe people, the trucking people, the water people, and fracking, for instance. There's lots of jobs in South Texas that were booming, and now these people are hurting. I have a customer who had made $850,000 a year last year just in royalties alone due to the Eagle Ford growth. He's looking for a job today.
Wow.
Number one, he didn't manage his money very well. But number two is the fact that you can just see how from boom to bust how it affects people. And Joe Lunchbox is not feeling the benefit of the low oil prices yet. I would hope that maybe by March, if it stays, it'll push through. But even at 150 or 160, that's cheap gas, and you have to realize what it does to everybody else in the oil sector. How many jobs are you willing to give up? How many businesses need to go bankrupt so you have $1.50 gas? The ripple effects are huge.
I mean, we're really talking about bear markets here, but when you think about the overarching issue with all this, you mentioned China, Russia there. I mean, Russia's pretty much given us the finger and saying, we're not going to deal with U.S. dollars anymore. We're going to leave the dollar system. If the Russians are able to do this, if China, India, Brazil, the BRICS nations go along, then you've removed a lot of the international payment system from dependency on the dollar, producing a run on the U.S. dollar, I would think. I mean, has the death of the dollar officially begun is the first question, gentlemen. And then also, when you think about the precious metals and the fact that we might have been seeing the bottom there, you think about Nixon issuing decrees, flooding the world with these paper dollar Ponzi scheme, robbing every nation. You think about the unrestricted and unregulated 100-year-old Federal Reserve fox watching over the gold-filled henhouse, and you think about Bretton Woods, and you think about the fact there was nothing stopping the Fed, and the Fed ain't federal, folks, from printing and expanding the supply of these reserve notes. And then again, no thanks to Nixon. What do you do with all that, too? Joseph, I want you to answer that first, and then you can flip it back to Ross there.
all, people lose sight of the fact we were only on the gold standard 27 years. We've been off it now 45. And I think we all witnessing the early demise of the dollar. We're starting to see nations trade for goods and services outside of the dollar. We're seeing Iran sell oil for gold. We're seeing Russia sell oil for gold. And we're starting to see other countries as well aligning themselves, certainly with what is going on coming out of China and Russia. So I think we're in the early stages of these dollars certainly coming back to the shores of America. China is certainly looking to get out of their dollar-denominated assets. I believe China's holding probably $2.5 trillion in dollar-denominated assets. As you know, Sheila, they recently sold a large bulk of Treasury securities, and they're probably selling more. They continue to buy gold and silver. They continue to buy oil. They continue to store, I think, what's going to have value as the economic system certainly unfolds further. And again, we're in very interesting times, and we're in uncharted waters as to where we're going politically, socially, and more importantly, economically.
Ross?
I think there's an active what I call an economic war of attrition between the United States, Russia, and China, and Iran, and a few others. Even though we're making deals with Iran, bad deals, but nonetheless. But they're trying to break free of the dollar and the petrodollar. They want to break that back. Putin's made decrees saying you're never going to buy anything with dollars. It's got to be gold or rubles, and many countries are actually trading in yuan. So the Swiss set up their own trading for the yuan, so you can actually avoid the SWIFT system, which has been pretty much the petrodollar commerce engine for the world, and yet people going around that, doing ends around of the SWIFT system to make trade, and you're finding more and more people wanting to get away from the dollar because they know with $19 to $20 trillion of debt, which is unsustainable and never going to get paid back, they're just waiting for some kind of jubilee to happen to say suddenly, oh, well, we're just going to wipe the slate clean. Here's use our Etch-a-Sketch and erase all of the ledgers, start again. So I think the World Trade Organizations, the world companies around the world, countries are all saying, wait, we need to get out of the way of the dollar. Let's do our own thing. Why is this dollar homogeny that's we have to be stuck to based on Bretton Woods when it's a completely new world? And the petrodollar from 71 with Nixon, this is a whole new world order that they keep talking about doing. So they want to actually start to take control of that and decide on their own destinies and not be beholden to the powers in Washington. So there's an active economic war going on, and it could lead to shooting wars, because you all know all wars start with money. So at the end of the day, if this doesn't get solved economically and diplomatically, you may have a shooting situation going on between the United States, Russia, and China, and there's a lot of saber rattling between the Russians and the Americans now, between Syria and Ukraine and a lot of other things. There's a lot of people poking each other in the eyes right now. So it's just a matter of time before something could pop. And again, that's my opinion.
Well, and Iran really is kind of a wild card here, but let's also tie this into the situation in Burns, Oregon, though. There's, and I mean vastly rich lands over there in the West. Those ranchers and farmers, this standoff with the BLM feds, that's not just the only place it happened. We know the whole Bunkerville, Nevada, the Clive and Bundy showdown. I covered that and broke a story about good old Harry, the huckster Reid, traipsing off to China. He, of course, made a very shady deal with the Chinese. He traipses off there in 2011 at the Sun. He comes back with that ENN Energy Group, 100% owned by the Chinese government. That is a very clever scheme, Ross and Joseph, to sell off below market value, valuable land, mineral, water rights in that neck of the woods to communist China. And then they set up these large investment zones within America, owned and controlled by the communist China government? Really, the military is really who supersedes that. So they're only accountable to China's government. That's just like, we see foreign countries owning toll roads, ports throughout the United States. It's not bad enough that Chinese-owned factories, the Federal Reserve, Manhattan. I mean, this thing is getting pretty frightening, isn't it? Okay, weigh in on that, Joseph.
Well, I think we're witnessing an ongoing war globally for natural resources, and I think it's heating up. And Quite frankly and honestly, I think the Middle East is a tinderbox. I've never seen it more unstable in my lifetime, and I think the surprise is going to be for a lot of people the black swan event that comes out of there. That's what I believe.
Well, Joseph, you talk about three sort of things that underpin all of this. For people that haven't heard that, I want you to talk about that.
Well, as I've said in many shows we've got three wars going on simultaneously. We have a political war, the ongoing war and crisis in both the Ukraine and the Middle East. We have the ongoing monetary war now being played out globally between the precious metals and all the world's global fiat currencies, which is worsening and accelerating. We have an ongoing petroleum war, countries around the world now making plans to settle trades for oil and gas by bypassing the U.S. dollar. Gold and silver now a choice for settling transactions involving the purchase of any energy supplies, and I think that's going to increase. That's what I think is going on.
Weigh in on that, Ross.
I would concur. I mean, the political drama that's going on around the world, I mean, I think it's not just political, but it's military. All kinds of things are being positioned, all kinds of equipment being positioned around the world. You're seeing the influx of refugees from the Middle East devastating the European continent and causing huge social upheaval. It's going to be the end of Merkel probably here in the next few weeks. And so with that, we're seeing some of that the same thing. We haven't seen the drastic, I would say, acting out of the rapes and all of the other type of bad behavior that's going on in Europe. But the Swedes, for instance, don't even want to go out of their houses anymore, and the Germans are buying guns at the highest level. And it's even scarier as you're getting Nazi type parties coming up out of Europe and the xenophobic ideas, and it's all driven by this immigration. So this political and cultural change that's being brought about, intentional in my mind, is changing the fabric of Europe, and it's coming to us as well. Except we just haven't had any publicized, major rapes or beheadings or stabbings and things like that. And if there are, they're always categorized as workplace violence or something like that to downplay so that you don't see the truth in it. So back to the Joe Lunchbox, well, he sees whatever's on Fox News or CNN or whoever, and they never cover this stuff. So most of the stuff in Oregon has been covered from one point of view, and the only way you hear anything about Burns, Oregon, outside of maybe what the crimes the BLM did and how people were shot by the law enforcement, it's all managed by the media complex that says that this is here's our agenda, here's your playbook, and this is how you speak to it. So again, you're finding the political stuff. You have the gold play, and I'd like to have Joseph weigh in on how gold is still maintaining above the 1100 level, because I'm hearing the resistance level is 1150, but he has great statistics, so I'd love to hear his thoughts on that. But the gold play is, it's with the fiat, it's constantly, it's almost like a sine wave. If you look at the gold numbers, it'll rise up, and then a week later it comes back down again. It's almost like a sine wave on an O-scope, because you can almost predict when the shorts are going to hit it or the big banks are going to hit it. And I know for a fact, being part of Chase, and in some inside things I've seen, is that they tell investors, don't buy gold or silver, it's a bad play. Then they load up on millions of ounces. So they'll artificially raise the price, short it, make a ton of money, then buy it, raise the price, sell it, then short it. So there's a huge cycle, and it's almost manipulated. So to Joseph's point, it's another war. And then the petroleum piece is just an unknown player. You just don't know where the oil-producing countries are going to land on this. And that's going to be the next big crisis. I think you may see oil going back down to the 20s again.
Let's just remind some of the listeners that are in the queue, they might just be listening, but folks, if you want to ask any questions to the gentleman, or you can weigh in on whatever's on your mind, the number to call, of course, if you're joining us late, 646-668-8039, but you have to press 1 to get into the queue to ask questions. What is your take, Joseph Meyer, famed economist, who's, of course, if you're joining us late, we have the Chuck Norrises of everything economics joining us today. Such a powerful, dynamic duo. Ross Powell, Joseph Meyer. What is your thoughts, Joseph, on the fact that precious metals, I mean, I even have talked to guys that can't seem to give it away. What are we going to be seeing with the and don't forget, Joseph, you and I, actually, I'll throw this in there. You and I talked about this. When I was doing mining deals for the Ministry of Energy, I actually had a guy, a geologist, tell me, a very renowned geologist said, 5 years of silver, and that's done. And, of course, that was more than 5 years ago. What are your thoughts on both those things?
Well, I think we've made, or we're in the process of making, a very important long-term bottom in gold and silver. Having said that, most commodity super cycle bull markets last 18 to 20 years. I think when we take a look at when we put the lows in place, as you know, for gold, $255 an ounce in 1999, we retested it in 2001. And for silver, we had it trading below $4 an ounce. I believe the greatest gains in this commodity bull market are not behind us, they're still in front of us, and I think gold and silver should be accumulated at these levels and put away. I think when we talk about crude oil, there's 6 periods where we've seen oil double within 2 years. I'd like to name those periods for your listening audience, Sheila. January of 1974, November of 1979, September of 1980, June of 2000, August of 2005, and lastly, December of 2008. So what I am saying is I believe over the next 2 years we could see oil very easily double from these present valuations, and I think it's going to take gold and silver back to the upside with it as well. That's what I think is ahead.
Any thoughts on that, Ross?
No, I think absolutely. I mean, oil is priced way too low in my mind. I mean, it's unmanageable at $30 a barrel or $32 with the cost of production. And the thing that I find intriguing is that when all of the North Dakota and the Texas and up in Alberta and all of this fracking was just creating huge oil revenue and pushing it out. The United States was actually energy independent for a short period of time. That we had excess, or we actually could export it, not importing. They passed a law in Congress. The bill passed that we could actually export from Texas directly out. And so suddenly, then once we get there, it gets my conspiracy theory all irritated. Suddenly, that all these things, we can't have America being energy independent, although that's our goal, our stated goal. So all these things collapse, and now we're back at $30, which is, you can't pull it out of the ground for that kind of money. And I'm sure your listener out of Alberta will attest to that. So you can't pull it out of the ground for $30 a barrel. So you had 3 months ago to 4 months ago, you had 190 active drilling rigs in Texas. Not wells, but actual drillers. Well, I don't call them wildcatters, but drilling platforms. Today you have under 60, and with that goes all of the peripheral gear and all that everything. So oil can't stay it's not sustainable at $30 a barrel. You can't have that. So you're gonna wreck your economy. So I think Joseph Reed, it could definitely double. And there's many people that are receiving checks in the mail from the oil companies who would love to see it double, because that will change their lifestyle significantly, and it will add more jobs because people will start drilling again. So I think Joseph is right on that. I think you can definitely see it double potentially, but I think there may be some more pain in the short term until the oil-producing countries work together and shore it all up.
Joseph, we have one question coming out of the chat. It says, this is the greatest transfer of wealth since the Great Depression. Please get the gentleman to weigh in on that. And are we really facing unprecedented times here? What do they think will happen when the banks attack the digital currency? You go to your ATM on a Monday morning and, well, you've got no money. Both gentlemen weigh in on that question.
Well, again, I believe we're in unprecedented times and in uncharted waters, as I've said earlier. I further believe we've seen the greatest transfer of wealth from individuals to corporations, and certainly Wall Street, that we've witnessed since the crash in 1929 and certainly the Depression of the 30s. I think we have more people in debt now than ever before. I think the job market has never been poorer. We've got one of the lowest saving rates in the world. We have very low interest rates, but they're meaningless because the money never worked its way down to working class America. And I think what we're looking at now with the equity markets throwing off signs of entering a bear market, I think the economy is in trouble. I think it's been in trouble for quite some time. And I think we're going to see a serious repricing of all global world asset classes. We're going to hedge against inflation, and that's the precious metals, both gold and silver. It's an absolute must.
Buy gold and silver. Okay. Go ahead, Ross.
Sure, I would agree with him as well. But however, the one thing that's interesting about the digital currency and Bitcoin is you're finding, and you can search on the internet on this, but you can find that Bank of America, Chase, Goldman Sachs, and all the major banks are investing huge dollars into their own versions of Bitcoin, for instance. So they're moving towards a digital currency, and Bank of America alone has put in 25 patents over the last year or so on digital currencies. I know Chase has tried in excess of 30 to 40 times to get patents and failed on certain aspects of digital currency, and Goldman Sachs is working on their own. I think they actually purchased a company to help them with that. So they're moving towards this digital currency, and the reason they do that is because they want to reduce the cash in the system, because cash is, when you have a fiat dollar, that's a liability on their balance sheet. So they can't implement negative interest rates on your balance in your bank account if you're holding hard cash, because that dollar is still worth $1. I mean, even though the buying power may be less, but it's still $1 on their balance sheet. So that's still a negative for the Fed. So at the end of the day, I come back to cash is king. When you have digital currency and they're going to try to make it more difficult to use cash in your transactions, the EU has already started doing it. Sweden's getting to be one of the most cashless societies ever. So when you can't use cash to barter with or trade with, all you have is your debit card or some other electronic means, maybe a chip in your hand or your retinal scan, or I don't know, your something on your debit card with your chip in it. At the end of the day, they can control your money, and suddenly your digits can be moved to the left instead of your decimal point can move to the left instead of to the right. And you wake up in the morning and suddenly you had $10,000, and now you have $1,000 because we devalued the currency and we did it digitally. So that's the kind of where it's going, because it helps the banks and governments control your funds. So I think the digital is pretty scary actually going forward.
It is very scary. It's like the cashless society cometh. That's one of my headlines at End Time News on weekendvigilante.com. I'm just going to give out the website, and I want to throw this idea, Ross, because you said something really astute just a minute ago there. But first, for those of us joining us late, the number, call in 646-668-8039 and press 1 if you want to talk to our guest, Ross Powell. Of course, his website is linked there in today's bio, along with Joseph Meyer, renowned famed economist. Both the gentlemen's websites are linked there. We've got straightmoneyanalysis.com and, of course, Ross's survival401k.com. You just triggered something. I really was frightened to see this, and I don't know if you saw this, Joseph, or I don't know if Ross saw this, but they have an actual, you mentioned the chip. Now, they actually, and this is a UK Telegraph article, this is a mainstream article reporting that they actually now have a chip that can release a special kind of, well, let's call it an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's actually an anti-fear medication. So, when people like Sheila Zelinsky start fear-mongering on the radio, you can just take a pill and it starts elevating all you're not in a trance or some kind of a hallucinatory thing, but it's frightening. It actually just slowly gives you enough, just dopamine dystopic trances you into not worrying about anything, which is frightening. But then you've got these, God knows, all these electromagnetic frequencies, the GMO frankenfoods, the chemtrails, the fluoride in the water. I mean, it's no wonder people are kind of in this utopian fog. Meanwhile, you've got all this manipulation, the staggering Ponzi scheme. Markets couldn't be, more frightening. And I think a lot of people that email me, they really want to disconnect from this machine. But how do you do that when all your cards are chipped and hacked, tracked, and attacked, and every single thing, it's real ID, it's, brain chipping, biometrics? I mean, this is a trifecta of terror, isn't it, Joseph?
Well, this is why you have to have a plan to go outside of the system. This is why you need gold and silver more than ever before. 1 ounce of gold bought the Dow in 1932, and it again bought it in 1980. People lose sight of the fact that gold is the money of kings, silver is the money of gentlemen, barter is the money of peasants, and debt is the money of slaves. You ever hear that, Lisa?
Yeah,
Sheila?
That's good. Yeah, I heard that. And also, well, before, Ross, you weigh in on this, one of the things I want you to talk to the people about, we've talked about it before, I want you to talk about the Monetary Control Act, because this is really a key piece of this, isn't it? And again, I always think, we're hearing so much about Nazi Germany. It's kind of this resurrection of the Third Reich. Every day is like a nature hike through the Nazi Germany, because everything's coming back. We see Mein Kampf being released again. We see hunting Hitler on TV. Every day the headlines, Germany this, Germany that, Weimar Republic. I mean, is that what we're looking at, though? Like the Reichmark? I mean, what are we looking at with all these flashpoints, Joseph? And then I'll volley it over to Ross.
Well, we're looking at the rise of nationalism once again in Germany. Where it goes from here, who can say? But when you speak to the Monetary Control Act of 1980, it was an executive piece of legislation, as you know, signed by President Ronald Reagan, and what it basically said is the government can intervene in any market at any time for any reason. This was back in 1980. So needless to say, since that time in 1980, we've seen intervention in all these markets all over the world, and it's continuing, and it's going to get, I think, a lot worse. So people have to understand markets do what they do best, and that's reprice assets, and we don't need intervention by these central banks distorting what's going on. Hopefully it'll end at some point, but right now I think it's going to continue and worsen before it gets better.
Sure, I think the biggest piece of legislation that affects your listeners and all of us on the radio here is the Dodd-Frank Act that was passed, and just most recently the Fed just actually took it on board and actually passed it as part of their law or part of their procedures. I think it was in either November or December meetings that they had that. I think it was actually the first meeting in December. And which means is there are no more bailouts. So the government's not supposed to intervene and actually take care of the corporations back like it did in 2008 and give money to all these banks, even though some of them didn't need it. And I worked for Chase or WAMU at the time, and our CEO Jamie Dimon, who was a brilliant man, said we don't need the money, we don't need it. But essentially, all the employees are told we had to take this money in order to make it look like everybody was equal. So all of that money that came across, of course, Chase took the money and they used it and invested in, and they made money. But the key part of the Dodd-Frank Act, and all your listeners, if they haven't heard this, they need to know this, is they went from depositors where they were a liability on the balance sheet of the bank to now they are unsecured creditors. So their savings can be or really owned by the bank. And that's why many times you try to get cash out of the bank, they look at you funny. Why do you need this? You need to get the third degree interrogation as to why you want cash. So their savings, and so the bail-in could come in where they said, well, you're at a certain level. Anything over the guarantee rate of 250, any deposit after that could be seized and used to pay debts in the event of a derivative unraveling or something like that. But they could lower that threshold to 100,000, to 50,000, to 25. Who knows where they would lower that rate, that level to? So again, it all comes back to cash is king, having stored value, as Joseph was saying, gold, silver, cash, land, things that are hard assets, things you can self-sustain your family with. So those are the major things. And to get back, and you asked a question earlier, but what can people do to get out of the system, and how can they get out of the worrying about the chips? They need to simplify their lifestyles. They need to simplify their lives and their debt and what their expectations are, because it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep, but also how much money you have to survive. So the better you simplify your life and get into the realm of growing your own food or working with people, having a secondary skill, is really tantamount to freedom. So being fully leveraged and have your credit cards maxed out and buy everything that's on TV, and you have to have the nicest car, the biggest house, and the nicest clothes, that's just drives yourself into slavery. Yeah. And as Joseph said, debt is part of slavery. So at the end of the day, simplify your life, and this system that's changing won't impact you nearly as strongly as if you're fully embracing it with buying all of the consumerism that they try to push down your throat.
Go ahead and weigh in on that, Joseph. And then I want to ask you both another question that is in the chat.
Well, I'm hoping we don't enter a hyperinflationary environment. I think if you go back and you study what happened in Germany after World War I, and they ran the printing presses until the currency was totally worthless. I think I've mentioned in a previous show, at the height of the Weimar Republic in 1923, a 1-ounce gold coin bought a whole city block in Frankfurt, Germany. A whole city block, a 1-ounce gold coin. Gold is a storage of value all through history, going back to biblical times. 350 loaves of bread could be bought with a 1-ounce gold coin. I finally made men's tailored suit going back in a depression could be bought with a 1-ounce gold coin. So I think when you talk about a storage of wealth, when you talk about a hedge against inflation, again, gold and silver has stood the test of time. I don't think anyone can refute that fact.
Well, Joseph, here's the thing. You mentioned Germany. We mentioned Weimar. I think of the Treaty of Versailles and the reparations, and then what happened with France and Germany, Belgium. I mean, when you have stagflation, deflation, inflation, that triple-headed beast, and China owns all our debt, what happens when this debt comes home to roost? I guess this is really what we're seeing, aren't we?
Well, we're seeing debt come back to the shores of America from all over the world, and people are moving away from the dollar as a storage of value. They're moving into the precious metals. I know the precious metals right now are out of favor. But to answer an earlier question, I've got support in gold at 1080 and then 1050, and I've got resistance on this move here, 1120, 1140. But I think in the scope of the bigger picture, I believe silver will outperform gold as we move forward. It's greatly depressed. I think you've got to own equally both gold and silver. I know a lot of people want to focus on just owning gold, but I think you absolutely have to own both of them. And I believe if you're going to own the precious metals, as I've said again many times, you have to take delivery of the physical, because if you don't have delivery of the physical, you don't own gold and silver.
We also should have quite a bit of cash on hand too, shouldn't we?
Yes. I think at a minimum we all need 6 months living expenses, and that's at a minimum. We're going to need cash to pay our daily living expenses and our bills, and I think we've got to look at the job market as continuing to worsen, and I think we're probably going to enter at some point a very, very serious economic downturn. I think I said also in a previous show that we'd see zero interest rates or negative interest rates before we'd ever see the Fed move to 1%. I think the Fed, again, was wrong for raising rates in December, and I'm looking for them to back down from that rate increase. And quite honestly, I believe this economy is very fragile, and it's continuing to deteriorate as we speak.
So, Ross, final thoughts, and then I'll springboard over to you, Joseph, because I want to talk about your newsletter. And, Ross, I want to talk about, you just have so many amazing services for the people, so I want you to talk about that too.
Sure. I mean, I would concur with Joseph. I mean, I don't think we would disagree on anything, actually. But I think silver has a huge upside, and I think it's the ratios that should tell you. Historic ratios have had the gold to silver to being 15 to 16 to 1 to 30 to 1 to 50 to 1, I guess, is this century's normalcy is 50 to 1. And now we're at 78 to 80 to 1 ratio. So if the silver returns to its normalcy, you're looking at $24 an ounce. You can make a huge amount of money that way. But again, at the end of the day, it's barterable. You can use it. People recognize it as currency all the way back to biblical times. You can find ancient coins in silver and gold 6,000 years back. So history tells you that that's a storable value. But people also need to have extra food in their house. They need to have water. They need a way to protect themselves. They need a way to keep a roof over their head. And 6 months of cash, I think, is a great idea. That's what I tell my customers. 6 months if you can afford it, 3 months at minimum, but try to have 6 months in cash, if that or in precious metals or both, if you can do it. So at the end of the day, you're on your own. I mean, everybody needs to band together, create a community of folks that have common belief systems, and will have each other's backs going forward. There's no man or woman is an island. So you have to be able to have people that you can depend on, your neighbors or your loved ones. And many times, families are divided on this whole belief system. So you have to find like-minded folks to band together and create what I would call a CAG or a MAG, which is a mutual assistance group that you can form in your own community. That you know that you have people that are going to have your back for you, because you can't stand alone. So at the end of the day, community is important as much as your physical assets.
In the waning moments here, we've got about 3 minutes left. I want you to take about a minute, Ross, and tell people about what you can do for them.
Sure. I'm the founder of Survival 401k. Essentially, we provide solo 401k plans to individuals, entrepreneurs, people that are just wanting to start a new business. And I mentioned during the course of the show that you should have a secondary source of income in case your job is eliminated. So find a skill, find a thing that you can create a second set of income now, and that could be whether you're painting houses or mowing lawns or selling something or learning to weld or becoming an electrician, or any of those trades are going to be very valuable. But having said that, that ability to have your own company allows you to have a solo 401k, which allows you to diversify your assets from just market securities, which you can still have. So it's an addition to proposition versus an instead of. So you could have a mix of equities and gold and silver that you hold in your hand. You can buy land, you can buy rental properties, you can do private loans, tax lien. There's a lot of things you can do into alternate assets. So you can get, if you're concerned about having all your eggs in one basket in the market, you can call me and we will work through a plan to get you not take all your money out of the market. I don't know if anybody wants to necessarily do that, but if you do, we can help you with that. But you can take a portion of it and diversify into hard assets. And as Joseph said, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. I mean, it's very key that you should have some stored value that you can put your hands on immediately.
Give out the website real quick again.
Sure. It's survival401k.com.
I've got the information linked there. We've got 1 minute. Joseph, you have an incredible newsletter that's second to none. There's nothing like it I've found out there. Tell people how they can get it, Joseph.
Go to the straightmoneyanalysis.com website. There's a full sample issue on the website that you can download and read. I'm working as we speak on the next issue of the newsletter, which will be the March 2016 issue. We write about the U.S. and global economy. We write about the stock and bond markets. We write about both gold and silver. In the energy sector, we write extensively on crude oil and natural gas. And we also have a very extensive commentary in every issue of the newsletter on Fed monetary policy. We're going to offer the 1-year subscription at the 6-month subscription price, $149.95. And if anyone signs up for the newsletter, I'll even include the 4 2015 issues of the newsletter as a bonus, Sheila.
Wow. I'm going to take advantage of that right after the show. Ross and Joseph, always a pleasure. We have about 5 seconds. So, folks, we'll see you Monday. Again, thank you, fellas, for weighing in on the program tonight. Good night, everyone, and God bless.